Maggie Whitmore thought she'd found peace in Maple Glen, until a notice showed up taped to her door. The morning sun filtered gently through the wide windows of Maple Diner, casting golden squares across the checkered tile floor. Maggie sat in the corner booth, the one nearest the gumball machine and far enough from the register to avoid being pulled into conversation. Her hands wrapped around a thick ceramic mug, still steaming with dark roast. She liked this place already, no music, just the occasional hiss from the griddle and the hum of old-timers nursing pancakes into lunchtime. Mrs. Lorraine had parked herself across from Maggie after seeing her alone. She wore a soft blue cardigan, her hair the color of cotton snow, and spoke in the slow, steady rhythm of someone who had lived on the same block for 50 years. "You know, back when the HOA started, they used to mail letters," she said. "Type them on actual typewriters. You'd get a note about your lawn, but it came with a pie recipe." She chuckled, then sipped her sweet tea. "Now it's all printouts and passive aggression." Maggie smiled politely, the kind of smile she'd learned to offer when she didn't want to get pulled into a longer story. Still, Lorraine's words lingered like the smell of syrup on the tabletop. Back at her house, a tidy blue-gray one-story tucked at the end of Lavender Lane, she stepped over a garden hose and opened the mailbox. Bills. A welcome circular. And then she noticed the envelope taped to her front door. She paused. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze, cream-colored and printed in 12-point Times New Roman. It read, "Notice of non-compliant lawn decor." Her brow furrowed. The only thing on her lawn was a small stone bird bath, one she'd found at a second-hand shop on her way up from Medford. No gnomes. No windmills. Just the bird bath and a few sprigs of lavender she'd planted the day she moved in. She peeled off the notice, staring at the bottom where the HOA president's name was printed in tidy block letters, Delilah Swanson. Inside, Maggie dropped her keys in the ceramic bowl near the door and reached for her phone. A few rings, and then the familiar gravel of her father's voice answered. "Hey, Mags." "Hi, Dad. You busy?" "Just reading the paper." "What's up?" She exhaled. "I got a notice from the HOA. For lawn decor." A pause. "What kind of decor?" "A bird bath. No frogs spitting water. Just a bird bath." He grunted. "Well, some of these places have rules about what's visible from the street." "It's not even that visible. It's behind a bush." Another pause. "Best you keep records. Some of these HOAs, they like paper trails. And remember, wherever you go, you still gotta play by the rules." "Yeah," she murmured. "So you've said." The call ended soon after. He hadn't asked about the house, or if she liked her new neighborhood. She placed the phone down slowly. Later that afternoon, she took a walk through the block. Everything looked curated. Lawns trimmed like golf courses. Porch lights identical. Mailboxes stood at equal heights, like soldiers in formation. She spotted another notice pinned to a garage door a few houses down, this one about outdated shutter paint. It wasn't just her. A few children played hopscotch on the sidewalk until their mother called them in sharply, "No chalk past the driveway, remember what the board said." When she returned home, a white sedan rolled slowly past her mailbox, windows tinted, driver unseen. It lingered just long enough to make her feel watched. That evening, she decided to attend the HOA meeting. The flyer said Thursday. 6 p.m. Clubhouse Room B. She arrived 5 minutes early, wearing jeans and a clean button-down, hair tied neatly back. The room smelled like lemon polish and old carpet. A folding table at the front bore a plastic sign, "Board only." 3 women and 1 man sat behind it. All looked over 60. One nursed a Tupperware container of mixed nuts. A woman with a razor-straight blonde bob stood by the sign-in sheet, clipboard in hand. "I'm Maggie Whitmore," she said, offering a light smile. "Just moved in on Lavender Lane." The woman glanced at her clipboard but didn't look up. "If you're a tenant," she said crisply, "I'm afraid these meetings are for owners only." "I own my home." Still no eye contact. Then please provide your lease. Maggie blinked. I don't have a lease. I bought the house. Outright. The woman, presumably Delilah, raised her eyes now. They were sharp, a shade too pale, like ice diluted in sun. Maple Glen requires ownership to be documented with the board. Until verified, your presence is unofficial. Behind her, one of the board members popped a nut into his mouth and looked away. I can bring the deed tomorrow, Maggie offered, trying to stay even. Until then, Delilah said, voice cool, we'd ask you not to participate. Maggie stood motionless for a breath. Then she turned, her heels soft on the carpet, and walked out. Maggie, stunned, stands alone outside the clubhouse. The bulletin reads, residents only. Ownership verified. Delilah didn't knock. She measured Maggie's lawn with a ruler, then wrote her up. It started just before 9 a.m., as the sun had barely begun to warm the sidewalks of Maple Glen. Maggie was sipping her second cup of coffee when the light caught something metallic beyond the hedge. She moved to the window. There, standing stiffly on the walkway, was the same woman from the HOA meeting, clipboard in one hand, metal ruler in the other. She wore white sneakers and a peach blouse tucked into khakis that hadn't wrinkled in years. Her blonde bob barely moved in the breeze as she bent down, measured the distance between Maggie's lavender planter and the driveway, then jotted something with exaggerated precision. Maggie set her cup down, opened the door. Can I help you? Delilah didn't look up. HOA visual inspection. Weekly perimeter checks. Is that written somewhere? Delilah straightened, still not making eye contact. Section 4B of the Homeowner Handbook. Residents are expected to maintain visual order. She turned and walked off. As she left, a yellow notice fluttered from her clipboard and landed squarely at Maggie's feet. Inside the house, Maggie added the new paper to her growing folder of what she now labeled, half-jokingly, neighborhood ephemera. This one read, unauthorized solar accent lighting, distracting from nighttime ambience. She shook her head. That afternoon, she stopped by the clubhouse. A hand-painted sign taped to the door read, Monthly HOA Board Social, all welcome. She figured it was a better time than any to try again. The air inside was heavy with lemon oil and chatter. For folding tables arranged in a loose square, with a long buffet of snacks to the side, pound cake in neat slices, small pitchers of sun tea, and plastic cups stacked like dominoes. Maggie stepped to the refreshment table and poured herself a glass. Beatrice stood nearby, rearranging forks with nervous precision. Her pearl necklace gleamed in the soft yellow light, and her shoes matched her sweater exactly. A small notebook peeked out from the front pocket of her cardigan. Maggie approached. Nice setup. Beatrice blinked. Thank you. We try to keep it orderly. You're the treasurer, right? She smiled, faintly. 22 years teaching 4th grade. I still like keeping columns straight. Delilah appeared just behind her, giving Beatrice a slight nod, then addressed Maggie with that same thin smile. Back so soon? I'm here for the tea. Delilah tilted her head, tone syrupy. As long as you're not planning to stay for the board matters. We're currently reviewing updates to property frontage ratios. Before Maggie could reply, Mrs. Lorraine materialized beside her, napkin in hand, and leaned in with a whisper that smelled faintly of lemon cake. B always did follow the strongest wind. The words landed softer than they sounded, but the meaning was clear. Maggie glanced toward Beatrice, who now avoided her gaze, carefully adjusting a pitcher that needed no adjusting. The meeting began without formality. Delilah stood at the front, flipping pages on her clipboard like she was announcing a town curfew. First order, unauthorized decor increasing. We're seeing a troubling number of novelty flags, pineapples, flamingos, seasonal confusion leads to aesthetic disorder. A few heads nodded. Gary Finch, seated beside a plate of cookies, mumbled, "Mine just says, welcome." Delilah didn't respond. She proceeded to present a color-coded chart labeled, Compliance Trends. Maggie scanned the room. Everyone looked like they'd been through this before, resigned, silent, somewhere between endurance and indifference. Beatrice took notes with a fountain pen, lips pursed, occasionally glancing toward Delilah before writing. Maggie wondered how many of those notes were ever reviewed, or if they served more as ritual than record. Mid-meeting, Lorraine leaned in again. Last year, she fined a man for drying his socks on a porch chair. Said it was visual pollution. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Who decides what's acceptable? Lorraine tapped her cane softly. Whoever prints the flyers. As the meeting wound down, Delilah wrapped her notes with a reminder: next week's perimeter checks will be expanded to side yard visibility. Please ensure trash bins remain obscured. Maggie rose to leave, slipping quietly toward the door. Before she could reach it, Delilah called after her. Ms. Whitmore. She turned. I'd suggest reviewing the handbook, especially Section 5. You're new. We understand. Maggie offered a polite nod, opened the door, and stepped back into the late afternoon warmth. Back home, she walked the perimeter of her yard. Nothing extravagant, no wind chimes, no colored planters. She'd even removed the solar lights. But she knew that wasn't the point. Inside her mailbox, another notice waited. Cream paper. Familiar font. Maggie, stunned, reads the top line: unapproved flag display. It's a miniature 4th of July pin on her porch. Arthur Whitmore arrived with a briefcase full of files, and a raised eyebrow at Delilah's latest flyer. He stepped out of the rental car like he was disembarking a train bound for disappointment. His hat was slightly tilted, the same beige sun hat he'd worn on every vacation since 1998. Maggie watched him from the porch, arms crossed, wondering whether he would comment on the birdbath or the mailbox first. Instead, he paused at the end of the walkway, frowned at a notice fluttering from her gatepost, and gave her a look that blended concern and the smallest hint of, "I told you so." "I brought lunch," he said, lifting a paper sack in one hand and a bulging file folder in the other. "And documents. Never go into a HOA unarmed." She smiled despite herself. "Let me guess. Roast beef, extra horseradish, no mayo." "That's the only correct way to eat roast beef." They sat on the porch and unwrapped their sandwiches. Birds chirped from the hedges, and the breeze carried the scent of grass cut slightly too short. Arthur chewed in silence, scanning the lawn like he expected a regulation inspector to leap from the bushes. "What exactly did you do to provoke them?" he asked finally. Maggie shrugged. "I exist." Later that afternoon, they headed into town for the Saturday farmers market. The square bustled with locals picking through strawberries and sweet corn. Folk music hummed from a speaker near the honey stand. Maggie grabbed a canvas tote and led her father down the aisle. They passed a stall of handmade soaps, and Arthur wrinkled his nose. "Smells like church potpourri and regret." At the tomato booth, Maggie held up 2 heirlooms. "Mom would have bought both." Arthur's face softened. She never chose between tomatoes. They paused by the flower tent, where buckets of sunflowers swayed in their buckets. Arthur reached out to straighten one stem, then hesitated. "She would have liked this town," he said quietly. Maggie nodded. On the walk back, they passed Mr. Joe Franklin's yard. Joe, now 83, stood on his porch with a notice flapping in his hand. His hose was coiled neatly near the steps, the nozzle gleaming in the sunlight. Arthur squinted at the paper. "What's that?" "Violation," Maggie said. "Hose visible from the street." Joe waved weakly and disappeared back inside. Arthur's jaw tensed. "This isn't policy," he murmured. "It's punishment." Back home, Maggie spread her growing stack of HOA notices across the kitchen table. Each was printed on the same cream paper, signed in Delilah's script-like font. She handed Arthur a mug of black coffee, no sugar, just the way he took it, and he sat down with a sigh. "Let's catalog them," he said. "What, like exhibits?" He opened his folder. "Exactly like exhibits. They created piles, decor, lighting, Bin visibility. Flag protocol. One especially absurd note read, excessive wind chime melody beyond 9 p.m. Maggie didn't own wind chimes. Arthur grunted. This is theater. He pulled out a highlighter and began marking dates, aligning them with meeting schedules and email timestamps. Maggie sat beside him, matching his pace. She noticed something else. The dates of Delilah's notices often aligned with times Maggie hosted quiet coffee chats or attended small events, nothing major, just signs of community. Targeted, Arthur muttered. Classic soft exclusion. She handed him her HOA newsletter collection, including the one with the subtle jab about unverified residents lowering neighborhood standards. Arthur read it once, then again. On the third pass, he narrowed his eyes. Her language is deliberate. Unverified. Not illegal. Not incorrect. Just, unwelcome. Maggie exhaled. It's like being constantly nudged out of your own home. She wants you to feel temporary. The folder thickened as the afternoon waned. Arthur added screenshots Maggie had taken of emails, notes on timestamps, and a photo of Delilah measuring her lawn. Maggie watched her father work, precise and unhurried. The same way he used to help with her science fair projects, building a trifold board that looked more like a legal exhibit than anything involving baking soda and vinegar. She's got a second lien, he said suddenly. Maggie looked up. Delilah? Arthur nodded. Public records. Her husband defaulted before their divorce. The lien floated through a few firms. I recognized the name, Midco Holdings. Maggie blinked. Isn't that the portfolio you bought into last year? Not just bought in. I own a section of it outright. A silence bloomed between them, heavy with implication. She might be paying you and not know it, Maggie said. Arthur leaned back. If she misses another payment, things get interesting. She picked up one of the notices, unapproved porch accent, and shook her head. I don't want revenge, she said. Arthur didn't reply. She studied his face, the same quiet edge he wore during court depositions. The man who taught her to label folders and never argue when you could document instead. But something had changed. His shoulders were relaxed, his voice less clipped. He'd seen the same thing she had. And it mattered. Arthur prints out a payment record showing Delilah's lien is on the verge of default. Delilah ran the HOA with bold print and fine print. Arthur came prepared for both. The sun hung low and angry in the Oregon sky, casting long, hard shadows across the white concrete sidewalks of Maple Glen. Lawns that were usually lush were starting to show yellow at the tips, despite the residents' best efforts to hose them down in the early evening hours. The distant sound of sprinklers chattered in the background, broken occasionally by muttered complaints about overreach and the sprinkler patrol. At number 114, Maggie flipped the potato salad once more before calling out, "Dinner's ready." Arthur appeared from the den, where he'd been cross-referencing HOA financial filings on his tablet. He looked up, sniffed the air, and his expression softened. Meatballs and brown gravy and, is that potato salad? Maggie nodded. Your favorite. He settled at the table. Your mom made this every July 3rd, called it her pre-independence tradition. They ate quietly, the rhythm of forks and casual clinks filling the room like an old tune they both remembered. Afterward, Maggie wiped her hands and asked, so what happens if she misses another lien payment? Arthur dabbed the corner of his mouth with a napkin. If she's 30 days late, we can issue intent to foreclose. It's not fun. It's not fast. But it's very, very real. The next morning, the temperature cracked 90 before noon. Residents in shorts and sun hats dragged hoses over parched grass, dodging HOA regulations as best they could. Maggie stepped out with a jug of iced tea, pausing as she saw Lorraine standing under the shade of a maple tree, fanning herself with a folded flyer. She wants to buy a new printer, Lorraine said without greeting. Maggie blinked. What for? Lorraine leaned in. Delilah says the current one doesn't handle color-coded citations well enough. Maggie suppressed a laugh. That's a new level. She's pitching it to the board tonight. Full budget proposal. That evening, Maggie and Arthur attended the HOA meeting. The clubhouse air conditioning struggled against the summer heat, and the folding chairs squeaked in protest as residents shifted uncomfortably. At the head table, Delilah stood tall in a linen blouse, fanning herself with a printout of bylaws. Beatrice sat beside her, her pearl necklace slightly askew, notebook open and pen poised. But her eyes seemed unfocused, as if her mind had wandered out into the heat and hadn't returned yet. Delilah launched into her presentation with the authority of someone who never doubted her own voice. Residents, we've noticed an uptick in guideline infringements, visible trash bins, unauthorized bunting, and non-regulation welcome mats. She clicked a remote. A screen lit up behind her with a slideshow titled Standards Matter, Preserving Maple Glen's Integrity. Arthur muttered under his breath, sounds like a cult slogan. Delilah continued, in order to maintain clarity in enforcement, I'm proposing a motion to upgrade our office printer. The current device produces faded notices, and we all know how that undermines credibility. She gestured toward Beatrice, who hesitated for a moment, then flipped her notebook closed. I'm not sure we need color ink for that, Beatrice said, voice barely above a whisper. Delilah blinked, caught off guard. We agreed. Beatrice adjusted her pearls. I said I'd review it. I never voted. The room shifted. Subtle. A murmur passed through the folding chairs like wind through dry grass. Arthur stood slowly. Out of curiosity, how much does this printer cost? Delilah narrowed her eyes. With installation, $1,324. A whistle sounded from somewhere near the back. Luis, the plumber from Walnut Street, chuckled audibly. Unless that thing scans souls, it's too much. Delilah pressed her lips together. It's a necessary upgrade. Arthur stepped forward, calm and deliberate. Then it must be properly voted on. With advance notice. And with full access to existing financials. Gary Finch, the quiet board member who usually stayed silent unless prompted with snacks, cleared his throat. He's got a point. Delilah's voice lost a bit of its shine. We'll table the motion. Beatrice nodded quietly, eyes avoiding Delilah's. After the meeting, Arthur handed Maggie a sealed envelope. Time to start the next phase. She raised an eyebrow. What's inside? Certified notice of intent. If she misses this payment, we move forward. Maggie swallowed. Are you sure? Arthur didn't hesitate. She's turning community management into personal vengeance. This isn't about flags or lawn decor anymore. They walked out into the cooling evening. Sprinklers hissed in the distance. A couple waved politely from across the street. For the first time since Maggie moved in, the air felt like something had shifted. Like a thread had pulled loose from a carefully woven curtain. Delilah receives Arthur's letter during a HOA meeting, her face flushes, she storms out mid-agenda. The HOA planned a silent celebration, Maggie planned fireworks, food, and freedom. 4th of July arrived with the scent of cut grass and charcoal smoke curling into the afternoon air. Maggie stood in her kitchen, slicing cherry pie and trying to ignore the stack of unopened HOA flyers that had accumulated on her side table like a slow-growing tumor. Outside, red, white and blue bunting hung from porch rails and mailbox flags tilted proudly under the Oregon sun. The community lawn had been claimed by folding chairs and picnic blankets by mid-morning. Maggie's grill smoked softly in the shade, the scent of grilled corn and hot dogs coaxing even the shyest neighbors out of their air-conditioned homes. Delilah, of course, had declared an official HOA observance earlier in the week: no amplified music, no unsupervised minors, and absolutely no fireworks of any kind. Her event featured a silent flag-folding demonstration and sugar-free lemonade in wax cups. Fewer than a dozen people attended. Most of them left after 15 minutes, clutching empty cups and avoiding eye contact. Maggie's version, spontaneous, messy, and full of life, drew nearly everyone else. Luis Morales arrived with a cooler in one hand and his 6-year-old daughter's fingers clutched in the other. The girl, Valentina, wore a sequined t-shirt with an eagle on it and carried a tiny paper flag, which she waved proudly as she danced between lawn chairs. At one point, she asked if she could tape it to the clubhouse railing. Maggie nodded. But before she reached the post, Delilah emerged from the clubhouse foyer like a drawn curtain. "No unauthorized signage," she snapped. Valentina froze, flag in hand, eyes wide. Louise stepped in. "It's a flag. On the 4th of July. Delilah didn't blink. "The HOA reserves the right to approve all visual elements." Maggie stepped forward, placing a hand on Valentina's shoulder. "She's not planting a banner. Just a flag. On a holiday." Delilah's eyes flicked over her clipboard. "Even holidays require order." Valentina quietly lowered her flag and walked back toward her father. Louise glared at Delilah, then joined the other residents near the grill. The cherry pie was a hit. Lorraine brought a mason jar of sweet tea so strong it could stain teeth. Gary Finch arrived with deviled eggs and a Bluetooth speaker that played swing music until someone danced, then turned it up. Near the grill, Beatrice hovered by the condiment table, nervously refolding napkins that didn't need folding. Maggie noticed the clipboard in her hand, Delilah's, unmistakably, with the silver clip and hand-colored tabs. "You working today?" Maggie asked gently. Beatrice looked startled. "Oh, no. Not really. Just helping, facilitate." "Delilah send you over with more rules?" Beatrice's lips tightened. "She asked me to circulate a petition. Something about banning unscheduled gatherings." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "She wants to ban barbecues." She phrased it differently. "Did you sign it?" Beatrice hesitated. Her fingers smoothed the corner of a napkin again and again. "Not yet." "Why not?" A long pause. "Because, this doesn't feel wrong. It feels right. I haven't seen this many people smiling here in years." Louise stepped over, placed a plate of grilled corn on the table, and raised his soda in a quiet toast to Beatrice. She gave him a small smile, then folded the clipboard shut and slid it into her tote bag. Across the lawn, Maggie spotted Delilah standing stiffly near the clubhouse, talking in low tones with Gary. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't look impressed. As the music picked up and sparklers began to crackle in small hands, Delilah walked briskly back inside, her heels crunching too loud against the gravel. Later that evening, Arthur joined Maggie on the porch with a pair of lawn chairs and 2 paper plates. "I think the HOA is about to meet its match." "You?" He shook his head. "This." He gestured toward the scene below, the children laughing, the neighbors chatting like old friends, the soft sound of Louis Armstrong drifting from the speakers. "It's harder to find unity." At dusk, Lorraine passed out sparklers to a group of kids, who squealed as the tips fizzled gold. Valentina held hers high, flag tucked proudly into her ponytail, and Beatrice lit it with a match she kept in her bag from her teaching days. As the first firework popped in the distance, a voice cut through the evening. "You're violating HOA guidelines." Delilah shouted from the edge of the parking lot, clipboard raised like a shield. Louise turned, unbothered. "We voted. Common space requires 2/3 consent." "You didn't read the flyer?" Delilah sputtered, but Maggie had already turned back toward the grill, lifting the lid as one last hot dog sizzled. Fireworks burst overhead, Delilah retreats as applause fills the lawn. Arthur ironed his shirt, Maggie made coffee. Both knew this vote wouldn't just be counted, it would be remembered. The morning of the special HOA meeting arrived quiet and cloudless, the air thick with anticipation and the faint aroma of backyard jasmine. Maggie sat on the front porch steps, hands curled around a chipped mug that once belonged to her mother. It had a faint hairline crack running down the side, but held strong, much like the woman who had used it every summer morning for 27 years. Arthur emerged from the guest room, dressed in slacks and a button-up, sleeves already rolled to the elbows. He carried 2 mugs and joined his daughter on the porch. They sat in silence for a while, watching a neighbor walk her terrier with military precision. She always walks him clockwise around the cul-de-sac, Arthur murmured. Maggie smiled. You keeping HOA-style tabs now? Just observing. They sipped their coffee, dark and unsweetened, the way her mother liked it. Arthur set his cup down gently. Did I ever tell you about the 1987 Ridgeview case? She shook her head. HOA tried to install mandatory fence standards. One color. One height. Didn't matter if the house backed to a cornfield or a cul-de-sac. I represented 3 families who refused. What happened? He sipped. HOA said, conformity is cohesion. I said, forced uniformity breeds resentment. Judge ruled in our favor. Said freedom of aesthetic isn't a threat to property value. Maggie leaned against the porch rail. What changed? Arthur stared across the lawn. People stopped pushing back. By early evening, the Maple Glen clubhouse brimmed with residents. The building itself, a pale stucco square with green trim and mismatched windows, looked like an aging church that had retired into civic service. Inside, rows of white plastic chairs faced a whiteboard stained with faded erasable ink. A projector hummed softly in the corner, vibrating on its folding cart. Delilah stood at the front, posture tight. Beatrice sat beside her, notebook closed, hands folded tightly in her lap. The crowd was larger than expected. Maggie noticed Lorraine, Gary, Luis, even the couple from Lot 7 who hadn't attended anything in 3 years. At the back, someone handed out pamphlets titled, Know Your Rights as Residents. Maggie recognized the font, Arthur's work. Delilah began. Today we vote on proposed revisions to HOA oversight and leadership structure. Only verified homeowners may vote. Each lot equals 1 ballot. A murmur moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Maggie stood, speaking slowly. Before we vote, I want to remind everyone why we're here. This isn't about potted plants or flag sizes. It's about how we live together. Luis raised a hand. And how we're treated. Lorraine chimed in. And how some of us have been dismissed. Then someone from the third row spoke up. Beatrice, remember the year you brought red, white and pink flowers for the July social, and Delilah made you cry? All heads turned. Beatrice's chin trembled. I thought pink was close enough, she whispered. Delilah shifted in her spot. We have standards. No, Beatrice interrupted softly. We had rules. But you made them weapons. Arthur rose next. It's not about removing rules. It's about restoring reason. Delilah opened her mouth to respond, but the room had already begun to turn. A silent tide, slow but undeniable. Ballots were passed. Pens scratched quietly. One by one, folded papers dropped into the collection box. 20 minutes later, the results were tallied. Luis approached the front, paper in hand, voice calm. Proposal passes. 3 new board members to be selected next month. Effective immediately, Delilah Swanson is relieved of leadership duties pending transition. The room remained quiet for a full 3 seconds before someone, Lorraine, maybe, began clapping. Others followed. Maggie stayed seated, watching Beatrice wipe her eyes and mouth a quiet thank you. Delilah remained frozen, fingers tight on her clipboard, as if letting go would undo everything she had built. Arthur leaned over and whispered to Maggie, she'll fight this. Maggie didn't look away. Let her. Delilah leaves the clubhouse alone, clipboard still in hand, but her kingdom gone. Maggie didn't plan to become the neighborhood's folk hero, she just wanted her birdbath back. On a breezy Thursday morning, as summer ripened the hydrangeas and the sidewalks cooled from an early drizzle, Maggie stood at the edge of her driveway beside a folding table. On it sat a neat stack of paper leaflets, secured by a polished river rock. The heading read, in bold, oversized lettering, Know Your HOA Rights, easy to read, especially for older residents who had long squinted through tiny fonts and bureaucratic fog. A couple moving into Lot 12 passed by. The husband was carrying a rolled-up garden hose, the wife balancing a bakery box and looking a bit overwhelmed by the bustle. "New to Maple Glen?" Maggie called warmly. They nodded. She handed them each a flyer. "This might help. It's written plainly, bigger print, clear rules, real protections. Just in case someone shows up with a clipboard." The woman chuckled. "We've heard stories." Maggie gave her a knowing smile. "Then you've heard about Delilah." That name still stirred reactions. Even stripped of her title, Delilah Swanson hadn't gone quietly. A week after the vote, she filed a small claims complaint at the county office. The stated reason? Loss of sleep due to unauthorized barbecue smoke and unregulated patriotic music. Arthur nearly choked on his toast reading the notice. Maggie's summons arrived folded and wrinkled, as if the mailman had struggled not to laugh. She actually cited auditory intrusion from community grilling, Arthur read aloud. Who writes like that? The court date was brief. Maggie sat beside Arthur in the back row of the courtroom, dressed in a navy blouse and holding a copy of the July 4th flyer, signed by 22 residents, listing the event as pre-approved under neighborhood guidelines. The judge glanced at the paperwork, scanned the complaint, and barely raised an eyebrow. "This appears to be a personal grievance, not a legal one," she said. Delilah, seated across the aisle in a stiff white blazer, opened her mouth, but the judge was already standing. Motion dismissed. Case closed. Good luck with your neighborhood. 5 minutes. That was all it took. Arthur leaned in. "That's the most efficient justice I've seen since parking court in '94. Maggie exhaled, equal parts relief and disbelief. Outside the courthouse, Delilah didn't speak. She simply walked to her car, arms stiff, door slamming with more emotion than she'd shown in 3 board meetings combined. The next morning, Maggie opened her front door to find a woven basket sitting on the porch mat. Inside, still warm banana muffins, a small jar of homemade jam, and a folded note on lined stationery. "I chose wrong. But I still bake right. B." Maggie smiled softly. Beatrice hadn't signed her name, but the handwriting was unmistakable, rounded cursive with modest loops, like a retired teacher who still graded in red ink. She brought the basket inside, placing it gently on the counter. Later that day, Maggie saw Beatrice trimming her rosebushes and offered a wave. Beatrice nodded back. Nothing more. But it was enough. In the evening, Maggie walked the loop around the neighborhood. More residents waved now. Lorraine had put up a birdhouse. Luis installed a free little library near the clubhouse. Someone even staked a sign near the entrance that read, "Welcome home, not welcome warnings." The air felt lighter. Not lawless, just less afraid. Delilah, meanwhile, kept to herself. The blinds on her home now stayed drawn most days. The clipboard no longer accompanied her walks. She passed by Maggie's house twice that week but didn't slow down. At the next informal gathering, a sunset porch chat over peach cobbler and iced tea, someone raised a toast to the quiet return of common sense. Maggie accepted with a nod, her hands still faintly dusted with flour from making cornbread. As twilight fell, Valentina skipped by on her scooter, flag fluttering from the back handle. Her father followed with a grin and a wave. From her window, Delilah watched. Delilah receives her final notice, not from the HOA, but from her lender, lien delinquency confirmed. The porch rail was freshly painted, the bunting was gone, and for once, Delilah stayed home. It was the first Saturday of October, and the sun cast long amber beams across Maple Glen like it knew the season was turning. A breeze carried hints of cinnamon and dry leaves, and from the clubhouse lawn came the warm hum of laughter, folding chairs, and clinking pie servers. The harvest gathering was an old neighborhood tradition, resurrected this year after a 3-year hiatus. Maggie stood near one of the checkered tables, helping Lorraine lay out slices of pecan pie on real plates, not paper ones. A glass bowl of ruby red cranberry punch caught the light beside a tray of slow-roasted ham that Luis had carved with his usual flair. Children chased each other around hay bales. Couples leaned against picnic benches with mugs of cider. Beatrice arranged a bouquet of dried corn stalks and sunflowers near the welcome sign, her pearl necklace peeking from a rust-colored scarf. The entire lawn was dressed in red and white gingham tablecloths. No violations had been issued. No clipboards in sight. At 3 p.m., Luis tapped the microphone near the makeshift podium. It squealed slightly, then settled. "Thanks to everyone who brought something," he began. "And to those who brought only good company, we needed that just as much." He smiled at Maggie, then turned serious. "Before we eat, just a quick note, the board has finalized the new fare enforcement policy." A few heads turned. "From now on," Luis continued, "no citations will be issued without a minimum of 72 hours written warning. And no surveillance cameras can be installed or maintained without 2/3 resident approval." A quiet cheer rippled through the crowd. Someone clapped. Maggie saw Arthur nod, his expression quietly proud. Then it was her turn. She stepped forward, paper in hand, and unfolded it slowly. Her voice, when it came, was clear but gentle. "Some of us came here for quiet. Others came for family. A few, like me, came to build something new after loss. What we found instead were rules without reason and silence that didn't feel peaceful. But here's the thing, sometimes the smallest porch can hold the biggest hope." She paused. "And when we build together, not just homes, but trust, we get something worth protecting. Not with citations or flyers, but with pie and conversation, and maybe a few shared weeds pulled on a Saturday." Laughter rose, warm and easy. Maggie stepped back. Lorraine patted her shoulder. As the sun dipped lower, the community gathered at long tables. Beatrice passed a bowl of roasted sweet potatoes to Gary, who passed it to Luis's daughter, Valentina, now proudly wearing a felt crown labeled Pie Princess. And at the edge of the lawn, near the clubhouse porch renamed Commons Corner, Maggie spotted Arthur unpacking a small box beside the garden bed. She walked over, squatting beside him. "What's that?" "Solar lights," he grunted, pulling one from its cardboard cradle. "I figured it's time we made the path clearer. For night walkers," she teased. "For people who stay." They worked in tandem, pressing stakes into soil. Maggie adjusted one light's angle as Arthur dusted off another. For the first time since her mother passed, the two of them shared the quiet without grief wedged between them. He reached for the last light. "You always were good at digging." She grinned. "You always were bad at centering." They laughed together. Behind them, the gathering continued, children playing, neighbors talking, no raised voices, no folded notices fluttering in the breeze. The community hadn't just reclaimed its lawn. It had reclaimed itself. As twilight fell, the solar lights flickered on, one by one. From the porch, Maggie looked out at Maple Glen, her father beside her. They sat quietly, watching the neighborhood breathe again. The porch was quiet now, but it held the memory of a community that had learned to raise its voice. What began as one woman refusing to shrink beneath a clipboard became a ripple that reached every corner of Maple Glen. Together, they reminded each other, and themselves, that rules should protect, not punish. Like sunlight on a freshly swept step, justice doesn't shout, it simply shows up, steady and warm. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone knocks with a rule, there'll be neighbors ready to answer with a reminder of their rights.